Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how are you today? Well, in today's video, I am going to be speaking on this article that was sent to me. And it talks about lockdown mongers that can point fingers, but if the science is in, who's to blame type thing, So Tony Baloney, if you know who I'm speaking of, emails, and his leading leftists and their malicious band of media mouthpieces have all been sticking their fingers in like the lockdown strategy, right? But as the data blows holes in the idea of lockdown inerrancy and the science gushes out, the ruling class is getting swept up in the current of their own failures, flailing at their opponents in a desperate attempt to divert blame. Pretty much, do they work? Do they not work? That type of thing. I don't know. I don't think that they did. That's just me. What do you think? For more than a year, proponents and opponents of the lockdowns have played like a tug of war over safety and freedom. And with both camps declaring fealty to science despite opposite messages, thanks to the ruling class who insisted shutting down would save lives, that became the conventional wisdom. Tony Baloney and Potato and their allies in media called for nationwide lockdowns, right? And with Potato condemning 45 for leaving the decision to states, and Tony Baloney saying this time last year, I don't understand why a nationwide stay-at-home order isn't happening. Yeah, you were the one who also said to double mask it, right? As is so often the case, however, the conventional wisdom was wrong. A new study from Chicago University economist Casey Mulligan, and that's Mulligan, validates what the anti-lockdowners, so there's these new terminologies that they come out with is crazy. It's what they knew all along, right? Lockdowns are a bad idea. Have you ever heard of the phrase cabin fever? That's pretty much like what was going on, After workplaces implemented mitigating measures, and they became far safer environments than people's own homes. Why? Because, like when like especially like at restaurants and things like that, I mean, more sanitation measures were being taken, like when it came to like the airflow and stuff like that, like the air ducts were being sanitized even more and stuff like that. Workplaces, like they were really buckling down on sanitation. Like I know, like where Sean works, I mean, even the bathrooms, like they were being cleaned and sanitized like every 15 minutes. It was crazy. That never happened. So available data from schools and hospitals and nursing homes and food processing plants and hairstylists and airlines show employers, adopting mitigation protocols in the spring of 2020. Because that's pretty much when we literally, like, the panic really set in, right? Was last spring. So, even though this was pretty much like brought out January of last year. So we, and then the spring is when the panic really, really, truly hit. And such mitigation protocols, including masking and reasonable social distancing, that was reasonable, And now it's like, reasonable is no longer arm's length. Then it was 6 feet and screening and improving airflow and steps people wouldn't even take in their own homes. And coincident with the adoption, infection rates in workplaces typically dropped from well above household rates to well below. Well, like here, like in my house, okay, I can say this. I have OCD really bad with cleaning. And I mean, I'm like the queen of Lysol and Odoban and bleach and things like that, so like everything gets cleaned every single day. And like when Sean would come home from work, because he comes in through the garage sometimes, I wouldn't even let him come into the house with his uniform on. There's a laundry basket and his robe hanging on the back of the garage door. Take your uniform off, put it in the laundry basket, put your robe on, then you can come in the house. Even leave your shoes out there. Because I have a compromised immune system. You're not coming in this house. Maybe I'm nuts. But guess who didn't get sick? Maybe I'm not nuts. I don't know. Anyway. So one example Mulligan included was the Duke, D-U-K-E, health system. After Duke's hospitals and clinics implemented strategies to mitigate the spread, an hour worked in the Duke health system went from being more dangerous than an hour outside work to being more than 3 times safer. This makes sense, of course, not only because free businesses have always possessed incentives to create safe environments for their patrons and employees, but because ordering people to stay home doesn't account for the social impulses of human beings that rightly prevent total isolation. This is why studies have shown community Rona transmission usually occurred inside households. Is that really true, though? Because if it was, why didn't they tell us to keep our masks on inside the house instead of putting signs up on all the doors of every single business saying you can't enter here without a mask? So workers have been 4 to 5 times less safe outside of their workplace than inside it, said a press release for the study in a direct rebuke to lockdowns. While stay-at-home continues to be pushed as promoting public health, nobody is checking the data, which say the opposite. The data has gone out the window with all the other unsavory data, like the number of students cheated out of a full year of education and what that means for the future of our workforce, or the almost 100,000 businesses that permanently shut their doors. Lockdown proponents don't like to talk about the fact that their policies resulted in the United States losing 3.5% of its GDP in 2020, without saving the more than 580,000 people whose deaths were attributed to the virus, plus untold lives lost to despair and lack of access to preventative care. And what do we have to show for the $2.6 trillion in taxpayer cash lawmakers threw at the problem without a moment of introspection? One fact we must not lose sight of, which the lockdown kings would prefer you'd forget, is that a number of scientists and other informed dissenters warned against locking down from the very beginning, only to be scorned and ignored by corporate media. Tony Baloney, Deborah Birx, which is Birx, and their bossy band of bureaucrats. These scientists were accused of red rum, threatening with losing their esteemed jobs, and slandered by the hive-minded mob. And worse still, left-wing lockdown proponents are now pointing fingers at scientists who oppose them and trying to blame the anti-lockdown crowd for the demise and disaster this shutdown's caused. For instance, while the media lauded Cuomo as a pandemic hero, right, while he locked down New York and ordered patients to be housed in nursing homes alongside the pandemic's most vulnerable, the same media this is, wow, excruciated leading scientists such as Dr. Sunetra Gupta, Gupta, who opposed anti-science lockdowns while advocating for special measures to protect the elderly. It's safe to say the approach of the Oxford University professor and leading infectious disease epidemiologist would have been superior to that of the scandal-ridden governor, but Gupta's detractors have blamed her for the demise that her guidance likely would have prevented. In The Guardian in January, Neil O'Brien, a Tory, Tory, member of British Parliament, smeared Gupta and other anti-lockdowners for their fantasies and tall tales, saying they make stuff up and have a hell of a lot to answer for. In the same pages, George Monbiot, that's Monbiot, called Gupta a pundit and said she makes misleading claims about the pandemic. So politicians are calling a doctor a pundit and saying that she's making misleading claims. Yeah, okay. So Gupta worked with two other notable public health experts in October of 2020 to draft the Great Barrington Declaration, which was signed by numerous other doctors and scientific experts. And the declaration called for implementing focused protection for vulnerable demographic groups, while working toward herd immunity for resilient populations and avoiding detrimental lockdowns. So Tony Baloney, the highest paid federal employee, who has been the biggest disgrace of the pandemic, you think, and now that his emails have been second only to communist China, and said the declaration was total nonsense and very dangerous. Who's the dangerous one here, Tony Baloney? Who's the dangerous one here? Okay. The media called it the epitome of arrogance and reckless, implying that the Center for Disease Control's opposite approach of sweeping and invasive restrictions relied on intellectual humility. Despised the latter, assuming elites knew better than most Americans what would be best for each of them. So we don't know what's best for ourselves then? That's what they're saying. We don't know what's best for ourselves. Yeah. Okay. The Director General of the World Health Organization, who is also a shill for the murderous CCP, called the idea unethical. And leaders such as Birx, B-I-R-X, who was the federal Rona response coordinator, are also pushing blame. and she now says hundreds of thousands of lives lost to the virus could have been mitigated or decreased substantially. And the federal government did not provide consistent messaging to the American people. And that is fault number one, she said. But the truth of the matter is that the inconsistent messaging came from Birx and her team. Instead of working to protect the vulnerable elderly, Birx made personal visits to states where she undermined the president's messaging, paying special attention to college students who are extremely low risk. A study released last month of the effects of lockdowns in 10 countries was damning. Not only did researchers find that mandatory stay-at-home and business closures resulted in no clear, significant beneficial effect on case growth in any country, but in some cases, lockdowns were actually pro-contagion. Pair that with reporting from the New York Times on Tuesday exposing the CDC and prevention for manipulating data and unnecessarily restrictive recommendations, while the agency said that less than 10% of the transmission was happening outdoors. The true figure for outdoor transmission appears to be below 1% and might even be less than 0.1%. Nevertheless, the CDC has taken lockdowns a step further by attempting to micromanage how businesses and individuals behave outside. These recommendations would be more grounded in science if anywhere close to 10% of transmission were occurring outdoors, but it's not. David Leonhardt, it's Leonhardt, wrote in the Times morning newsletter, there is not a single documented infection anywhere in the world from casual outdoor interactions, such as walking past someone on the street or eating at a nearby table. First, note that this is the same David Leonhardt who recently wrote in a different Times newsletter that contributing to the culture of mask wearing by putting on a face covering is the decent thing to do. So he's contradicting himself. Like Birx and Tony Baloney and other ruling class elites, media personalities don't get to shift blame when their convictions turn out to be backward. Second, note that the CDC's mammoth error, extra cautious and invasive outdoor restrictions, were as wrong-headed as other aspects of lockdowns. The science is surfacing, and with it, the reality that our ruling classes blew it big time. They failed on the lockdowns, they slashed our economy, they killed the elderly, screwed students, and ruined livelihoods. They lied about transmission, flip-flop on guidelines, and they didn't abide by it anyway, and turned our cultural climate into a fearful and isolated space. When intelligent people raised alarm bells and offered alternatives, they were scoffed at and ignored. Now the ruling class is trying to blame those who were right from the start. Don't let them. Wow. So, Tony Baloney, you've been called out. You've been canceled. You've been put out on Front Street, and you've been exposed. Need I say any more? Unbelievable. I would touch on his emails, but, I'm sure I'll get into trouble for that. I'll probably get in trouble for this. But, that's just how it is, because I'm constantly being watched. Anyway, I love you. I'll see you in the next one. You stay safe, stay positive, keep calm, keep prepping, and as always, fearless. Bye.